Welcome back to the COS Business Podcast, number one podcast in Colorado Springs.
Today, our highlighted sponsor is Epic Eyewear. That's EPOCH eyewear.com.
Awesome. Well, today we have a very special guest, Meg Solomon with ABA Across Environments. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is really nice.
Yeah. Well, we are so appreciative that you're here. It's been so great to have you here for the show. And we had some technical difficulties before you got here. So thanks for bearing with us and being patient as we got through some things. But yeah, this has been great.
Yeah.
And before we dive into too far, I do notice that your mic is farther than usual. Edgar, is that okay? It's not okay? Yeah.
Get a
Push
little
it up a little bit.
Get a little bit closer in
I
there.
can visually kind of know.
Good. You've got an eye for these things.
Yeah.
That's your specialty. That's
Exactly,
awesome.
yeah. And it's great about this is it's a podcast, so we can just like keep it casual and interesting. So yeah, I didn't want you to get like started in like a awesome
No, I did see it right when I was asking the
Yeah,
question.
y'all are great.
so-
I'm glad you caught it early.
For sure.
Well,
Perfect.
tell us like your story about how this
Yeah.
came about. Let's start with this early life. What got you into entrepreneurship
Yeah.
in general?
Oh, okay. So that's actually a great question.
Yeah.
I grew up in an entrepreneurial family.
Oh.
My dad owns his business in Texas. My mom owns a small boutique also in my hometown. My grandmother was always very prideful of her work ethic. And my hometown is really only known for a hospital. So she worked at that hospital. She always talked about how she worked for the president, right? And so she also helped my grandfather start his company. And her parents founded a small town outside of what used to be called Fort Hood in Texas.
Yeah.
Is it Fort Cavazos now? No, I don't remember. But yeah, near Killeen. So he founded the town of Harker Heights. And that was always just one of those things that when I grew up, it was instilled in me that you went out and then you did something greater and more than with the tools that were given to you.
Totally.
My sister, I think, also was given that same type of work ethic. She is in a totally different field in Dallas, Texas. And it was just one of those things that I think both of us found a lot of pride with our families and being able to continue on with that type of legacy, even though neither of us are doing anything that was anything aligned with what our families started out with. So it's really kind of a neat thing. But I grew up in Texas. And after I lived in Texas and went to undergrad there in a small liberal arts school, I lived in Dallas and I worked in retail and I worked in commercial real estate. And I honestly hated everything about it, like absolutely everything. I felt worthless at the end of the day. And I really felt like I wasn't doing anything that was really productive or aligned with my values. So I thought maybe I just needed to move and get out of Dallas and get out of Texas and get different scenery, different culture, experience some other people. So I moved to Los Angeles and that was fantastic. I did meet a lot of people and I did get a lot of cultural experiences that I wouldn't have had. And I met some of my greatest friends. It's also where I met my husband. But I also realized that I really didn't enjoy working in those types of high-paced environments like commercial real estate
Right.
or high-end retail. And I kind of took a step back from, reality, I guess, for a little bit. So in my mid-20s, I started working just in restaurants. And I worked with a ton of really cool chefs. And some of them are very well-renowned chefs now. They have restaurants in Vegas and Sacramento. And now one of my favorite chefs is in Australia. And he has a ton of great restaurants out there now too in Sydney. And so that's also really neat just to have that kind of experience. But then I realized again, at the end of the day, I wasn't in alignment with my values. And I think you're going to find values as one of my biggest topics because every time that there's a conflict in my life, I've recognized that there's a values misalignment. And I don't think that that's, by chance. There's always a reason. And usually that's, for me at least, I found to be the reason. So I was talking with a friend of mine and I was telling her how much I enjoyed working and living in LA, but I really needed just a little bit more fulfillment. And so she suggested that I started volunteering at a school and it was called the Help Group. It's still around and it's in Sherman Oaks. It's fantastic. It's primarily for learners and students who are on the autism spectrum. But then they have a very small, like early learner program for EBD or emotional behavioral disorder. And that's where I started volunteering. And it just all started clicking, right? That values alignment started happening. And my husband likes to joke because this is also at a time where I was still really trying to figure it out, but it was all starting to make so much sense that then I started working like 5 or 6 different jobs because LA is a gig society, right? Like that's what the community is about. So I worked, sometimes I would like teach this Mommy and Me class in the Pacific Palisades. And then another time I was volunteering at the school, or another time I was teaching science classes to kindergartners. But it was fun and it was fulfilling. And that's when I realized this kind of passion and drive. And that's actually got me into ABA, because when I started working with children in that kind of atmosphere, then I was introduced to this science and I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And here we are 15 years later.
Wow.
And it all just has kept clicking.
What is ABA?
That's a great question too. So ABA is at the science of applied behavior analysis. And really most people look at it as the application with autism. It really has so many broad applications. So a great everyday application of ABA is a traffic signal. What does a green light signal to you?
Go.
Cool. What does a red light signal?
Stop.
Slow down. I'm just kidding.
Right. Speed up as fast as you can and make it through and just watch. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For some people, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But that's ABA. So it's shaped our behavior so that we know when it's green, we're supposed to go. When it's yellow, we either haul ass or we slow down. Right. And then if it's red, we stop. That's applied behavior analysis. So it's creating environmental modifications or adaptations, right? To different needs, to meet different needs and to shape behaviors. It does have a horrible reputation. So this is something that I want to call out right away. The elephant in the room with ABA is that with most sciences, it really has a pretty horrific past, a past that's really rooted in ableism.
Like eugenics or something?
Oh my, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So those types of modifications, right? Where it's this idea of perfection. And if you aren't communicating in the same ways that you and I communicate, then that's a problem and it has to be fixed. That's its history. Well, part of its history. It's rather traumatic if you really dig into it. But the unfortunate thing is if you really dig into a lot of sciences that deal with humans, it's all pretty traumatic. We unfortunately found a lot of compassion through these things, right?
Yeah.
So while ABA right now is based on a medical model where it primarily is used for autism or other what people would call behavioral differences or disorders like ADHD or emotional behavioral disorder, lots of different learning differences. Those are where ABA can usually be applied. But what we do sometimes find is that there's still this drive for it to be compliance-based, right? Do what I say. What an adult says or what an adult directs you to do, you should do and should do it immediately without question. Because honestly, that's the way we are raised as a society. That's the way schools are based. Like you listen to your teacher and you do what your teacher says right away, right? I think a lot of us carry on some of that school-based trauma too as adults. So that's the inherent evil of these types of applications of sciences as well. That's also what we strive to do differently. That's why I founded ABA Across Environments in 2018, was really to break away from that kind of perception of what behavior change is supposed to look like. I would much rather behavior change look like red light, green light, yellow light, right? That type of shaping of behavior where it's like, yes, these contingencies make sense. If I run a red light and haul ass through that intersection, I'm probably going to get hit by a car.
Or hurt someone.
Or hurt someone, much worse, right? Whereas that's kind of the mindset that the ABA application should be, which is the overall no harm, right? How do we prevent harm from happening? And that's what our hope is with what we've been doing.
We'd like to take a quick moment and thank our sponsors.
Home Day. Are you an employer looking to boost employee retention and recruitment? Home Day offers a unique benefit program that helps your employees buy their dream home while saving an average of $4,000 on closing costs.
Neon Pig Creative. Bring brands to life with Neon Pig Creative. Dazzling designs and strategic marketing make businesses stand out. Spark creativity at neonpigcreative.com. That's neonpigcreative.com.
Exponential Impact. Fuel startup success with exponential impact, mentorship, resources, and support available to amplify impact. Join a community of change makers at exponentialimpact.com.
That's exponentialimpact.com.
Fast Signs.
Fast Signs can help you with all your signage and visual marketing needs. Whether you're starting a new business or just need a signage refresh, let Fast Signs help you. Make your statement. That's fastsigns.com. Cars Helping Charities.
Cars Helping Charities is a turnkey fundraising solution for nonprofits. Cars Helping Charities allows your nonprofit to accept vehicle donations, which are sold, and then the funds go to the organization. CHC is partnering with my nonprofit of choice, Mattersville, to help them raise funds through vehicle donations. Please consider donating your car to support Mattersville. CHC will pick up any car, an old clunker you have sitting in your driveway, or a car you just don't feel like selling anymore. Make sure to visit carshelpingcharities.org. That's carshelpingcharities.org.
Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, that was a great question.
Yeah.
It's super fascinating too. And I think you're hitting on a lot of different touch points of like conforming to school, traditional school, of like them pointing out specific weaknesses in somebody and being like, okay, like we're going to put you in special ed because you're not conforming to like the mainstream education system of whatever. But what we're finding, I'm sure as you're finding in society, is there's just so many folks who just learn differently. ADHD, autistic folks. I mean, there's so much. And some of these people are some of the biggest contributors to society. If you think about some of the smartest pioneers in the country, I mean, you got like an Elon Musk or like an Albert Einstein, who I think was Asperger's.
So,
Yes. And so
can I say a quote of what Einstein did?
Yeah.
I just learned this quote. He said, "I'm not smarter than everyone. I just stayed with problems longer."
Yes.
And I love that.
That's a great
that
quote.
I just learned that quote.
Yes. Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut
No,
you
no,
out.
no, no.
No, but
That's great.
It's such a great point too, because really that tenacity is an autistic characteristic. It's an ADHD. It's a neurodivergent characteristic. And when we, like what you pointed out earlier, when we shy away from the strengths and instead really focus on a deficit model, what we're really doing is creating more of a strain, right, between what society needs and what those individuals need for learning and for growth and development. So that's such a great point. And I think because school focuses so much on the macro, they have a difficult time being able to focus on that individual's needs. And that's not at a fault to the teachers. And I think that should be really clear. These teachers in every single school, at least from what I've experienced, are doing the best that they have with the resources that they have. However, the system is designed to fail them. And that's the unfortunate part about society as a whole, in my opinion. But that's a whole other podcast.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think my teachers helped notice that in me, being with ADHD and all that stuff. And like my art teacher specifically, she was super awesome. And
God bless the fine arts teachers.
Yeah.
They're the ones who save all of society, in my opinion.
she kind of looked like Miss Frizzle too, in a way. So.
Yes, these should.
Instead of red blonde hair. So,
Yes, perfect. But I'm sure it was equally.
She was super cool. She understood like what I needed, and like my curriculum at the end, like by the time I graduated, understood like certain aspects. And this was or about 12 years ago, something like that. Yeah, something like that. And like where people were still kind of like starting to learn about like the different like ways that people learn, and like
and
then there was a lot of misconceptions
on that
in that.
Yeah, very much so.
And towards the end, they kind of like, and I think this actually happened like throughout like the last many decades actually, where people were just get pushed through school when they really weren't even learning, but they were just pushed through to get those grades.
Child left behind.
Exactly.
And it's the unfortunate thing, because this is a great example, in my opinion, of a misinterpretation of a law. So No Child Left Behind its intention wasn't to push children through,
Mhm.
but that's what ended up happening
Yeah.
because unfortunately the systems were not put in place before the law rolled out. So what ended up happening is that all of these teachers were like, whoa, 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 this person's not to grade level. But because there wasn't a system in place to get that learner to grade level, they just had to be pushed through. And so now what we're seeing is 7th graders who are reading at a 4th grade level.
Oh my gosh.
And that is just
Mhm.
mind blowing to me. But again, that speaks to that individualized education that unfortunately they're not receiving. And finances are allocated in ways that I may not agree with, and some parents may agree with, and that's fine. That's their opinion. But what is happening is exactly what you're pointing to, which
Mhm.
is these children are being left behind.
And reading level is just one aspect, I think. It's like you got someone who may be struggling reading, but they could excel in this other area if you just push them to help guide them in that direction.
100%. And that's where those fine arts teachers come into place
Mhm.
or to play. But then who's missing now from what we're
Mhm.
noticing in our education? The
Yeah.
fine arts teachers. Those are the first departments to get cut, are those extracurriculars. But
Mm.
without your art teacher, you
Mhm.
wouldn't be here today in this position, right?
For sure. Yeah.
And
She was awesome. Yeah.
right. So it's really interesting to see what's happening now in
Mhm.
the educational society.
And then you have
Yeah.
dyslexia, which is another issue.
That's what you
And-
have too, right?
Yeah,
Dyslexia.
I don't know if I have it, but I was helping doing video production for a nonprofit,
Mhm.
and there was this one of the sessions that they had was this guy who's worked with dyslexic kids for like 30 years, and like he's really good at like helping the dyslexic kids learn how
Yeah.
to read. But during that 2-hour thing is like I got a little emotional because I realized, oh shit, that's me.
Yeah, that
And-
trauma came back.
Yeah,
quick.
and it actually, like, I was like almost teared up. I think I did tear up actually. I'm
Yeah.
just kind of saving face, but no, I think I did tear up because it was emotional for me to see all that. But what he was saying is like the things they've learned. Like if you're an adult and you didn't implement the processes that they've taught, you don't have time. You have all these other things in your life, like
Yep.
like that you got to
Early
worry about.
intervention's
So it's like
key.
early intervention what is key, and that's what he was
Yeah.
saying is like we actually can help dyslexic people read good. They just have to. It's he had a good analogy actually. He was like, it's almost like trying to, or I think it's like your hands are tied behind your back or something like that, and like or trying to learn how to write with your non-dominant hand. So it's
Yeah.
like teaching someone takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So if like you don't do the early intervention, it's like it's almost like life catches up to you. You have other things to
Yes.
worry about by the time. And it's like you still can as an adult, is what he was saying. It's just it's going to be a
It's
lot
so
harder.
much harder. That's something that I have to talk with caregivers about often, which is this like idea of that where a learner's supposed to be or where their child's supposed to be. And you're so right, because if early intervention didn't happen, and that's really 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh wow.
If after 5, if these interventions aren't happening, and if these things aren't tended to and given those supports and those tools, then you're looking at an exponential deficit then
Mhm. Yeah.
each year.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you see when sometimes we get an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old who has a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, a lot of times because they just now got that diagnosis, there were so many tools and so many things that were missed that now it's like trying to play a ton of catch up, and that progress is exponentially longer because they've missed some of those gains and those leaps from early neuroplasticity. Really,
Mhm.
it's really yeah, but it's still doable. It
Mhm.
just takes longer.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a hard concept for people to understand, especially when you want to see behaviors change in a positive way and you aren't seeing it as fast as you think that you should be seeing it.
That's crazy. Well, what do you think that COVID had? I'm sure COVID had a massive effect on education,
yeah.
especially folks. I mean, we're also lucky, right? Because we already went through K through 12, college, and COVID hits. We're already pretty much developed as far
Right.
as
If anything,
schooling
we
is
leaned
concerned.
more into our education, right? Like
Yeah.
how many of us picked up like side research projects
Mhm.
during that time, or
Yeah.
like learned how to make sourdough starter,
Right.
right? Like if anything, like
That was
we
the whole
really,
thing.
right? It
It's
really
very
was. Like,
true.
we're like, what can I teach myself during this
Mhm.
time? Whereas what we found with our kids was like, ooh, unless there was a lot of one-on-one instruction
Mhm.
coming from the home, it was really difficult for that to happen. But it's important to recognize that that one-on-one instruction comes with privilege. So unless that family had the privilege
Totally.
to provide that
Yeah.
type of help and one-on-one instruction for their kids, it's even more of that being left behind that we were talking about from the school setting.
And plus a strained economy where probably both parents are working full time
Yes.
over the, around the clock to support their kids, to put food on the table.
And their kids at home with a virtual classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the end, this is what we experienced, at least. So primarily what ABA Across Environments does is provide in-home services. We just opened up a center about a year ago. And the reason why we started in-home was because things weren't generalizing to homes. But COVID highlighted it so well, because I think everybody expected this, which was just, it's so crazy, but everybody expected that these kids were going to generalize academic skills via a computer and not in a classroom environment. This is a perfect example of how the environment creates and evokes behaviors that we want to see, and also creates and evokes behaviors that we don't want to see.
Right.
So what we ended up seeing, because we would assist a lot of times just to make sure that kids were staying on track or attending, they would turn their cameras off, right? They would mute themselves. They would say, "Oh, I didn't hear the instruction." And it was really just because they didn't want to do the instruction. There was nobody there monitoring, is this happening? Are they doing their 20 minutes of reading? No, they probably aren't, because their parents are working 2 jobs right now and trying to survive.
Right.
While also trying not to mentally go crazy, because this is the first time that they're also having to work from home ever in their lives.
Right.
So there were a lot of things that just were unrealistic that we placed on families during that time.
What a crazy time to be doing your work right now, especially in human history, where you got a 100-year essentially epidemic that hit you.
Oh, yeah.
And you're working through this, and then you're working with these kids, and then you're working in home. I'm assuming that's a big part of it. I'm also assuming like in-home environments, especially for underserved communities, can be very challenging. And I don't know if that's part of your network of folks as well, but
absolutely.
not many kids want to be at home and learn for many reasons beyond just like having a laptop or anything. It might be a very traumatic space for them.
You are 100% correct. And sometimes too, a lot of the kids that we work with aren't in first or secondary or even tertiary home placements, right? So they're on a 4th foster home.
Oh, man.
So you're right. That home is not.
It could be abusive.
It might not be what they would consider a safe place. We might walk in there and be like, "This is great. You've got food, you've got shelter, you've got, a place to take a shower and rest your head." But that's not necessarily meeting the needs of these kids who have experienced trauma. And again, like, these home environments might not necessarily be the safest for them. But then you also have to look at the alternative. And sometimes school's not necessarily the safest alternative for them either. And then where do they go? Where do these children go whenever they need that type of support and they're unable to get it at home for whatever reason? And this sometimes can also be because the caregivers have experienced their own traumatic history. We all carry baggage. It just depends on what that baggage looks like or what baggage we're willing to show other people.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing is that our children, and I speak from a mother, from a mother's perspective, our children see our baggage. They also then are carrying every single bag that we carried, and every single bag that our parents carried, and every single bag that our grandparents carried, right? And we're passing that all on to our children. So you're right. Sometimes the home environment is not the safest for them because it's not a place where they can express their emotions. It's not a place where they can be angry. It's not a place where they can cry. It's not a place where they can feel and then say, "I didn't like this," because their parents told them, "You should just deal with this. Life isn't fair." And that happens all the time.
We're going to take a quick break and thank our sponsors.
Pinnacle Advanced Primary Care. Skip the healthcare hassle with Pinnacle Advanced Primary Care. Direct primary care for a simple monthly fee, putting health first. No insurance needed. Experience personalized care that's as unique as every individual. Visit pinnacleapc.com to learn more. That's pinnacleapc.com. Franchise succeed.
Grow any business with Franchise Succeed. From development to expansion, turning small businesses into national brands through franchising. Start scaling up with a free consultation at franchisesucceed.com today. That's franchisesucceed.com.
Planet Duct. Breathe easier with Planet Duct, Colorado Springs' premier air duct cleaning service. Powerful vacuum trucks rid homes of allergens and dust. Clear the air by visiting planetduct.com. That's planetduct.com.
Epic Eyewear. Elevate style with Epic Eyewear. Innovative designs meet unmatched quality, ensuring a great look and better vision. Discover your next pair of shades at epiceyewear.com. That's epiceyewear.com, spelled EPOCH eyewear.com.
And we're running a special discount right now, Andrew. It's COSBP 15 for 15% off your
15% off your freaking order at epiceyewear.com. We're wearing the sunglasses right now. If you're watching, listening on the audio, definitely check out the video so you can see and check out how epic they are. EPOCH
eyewear.com.
Eyewear.com.
Now we will get back to this episode. I know this is a little bit off topic, but it kind of hits that same thing about children with their parents. I heard it from Patrick Bet-David about that kids essentially go through 3 phases with their folks. And the first one's always like idolization because it's your parents, your superhero, it's your dad. He's like the greatest person in the world.
He's never going to let you down.
Your mom and everything, like whatever it might be. And then so that's the first phase of it is just the idolization. And then you vilify them when you're like a teenager because you have friends and it's not really cool to hang out with your parents anymore, but you're also seeing those things that you're talking about with your parents, the things that you might not like, or they're enforcing things that you just don't want to do.
Yes.
And then at the very end, hopefully you get to this point, and maybe in your 20s, but some kids who have to grow up really early might have to do it in their teen years, but then you humanize them.
Yeah.
And you see them as who they are as humans. They're no longer your idol anymore because you see a lot of their faults.
Right.
And you have to accept them as a human being with their own faults.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting phase to kind of go into because then you understand your parent from like almost a eye to eye level.
Right.
And so I always thought that was very interesting because I think a lot of kids go through that, you know?
Oh, yeah. Well, and there's a lot, again, like this is an ABA that I'm about to talk about, but there's a lot to be said about that with attachment theory, right?
Yes.
So that secure base, right? So the idea is that the caregiver always provides the secure base for the child to come back. But if that secure base hasn't been established, they're going to seek out a secure base wherever they can.
Mm-hmm.
And that often then becomes where you'll find like risky behaviors or people who might align themselves with adults who are grooming or engaging in unsafe behaviors.
Right.
And it's because they're demonstrating this affection that they may not have been given throughout early childhood. And that's also something that kind of with behaviorism, we talk a lot about because a lot of my colleagues will essentially almost be as cold and as neutral as they possibly can to deliver some of these services because they don't want to provide any additional attention for some of these, what they might call challenging or maladaptive behaviors. But what that really ends up doing is creating even more of a disconnection, creating more of a cycle of seeking out then abusive patterns from people. Because, well, if this person who's supposed to be safe acts as though they're cold, what should I be seeking out then for a secure base? And so that's one of the things that we really try to, again, do very much differently because we do have this understanding of other sciences and how those apply with what we do with children, because childhood development is a huge scope that goes beyond just behavior, just as behavior is a huge scope that goes beyond just childhood development. So it's important that we really see where those things overlap and use the science and the tools that we already have so that we can provide more compassionate services and supports to these families and to these kids that's trauma informed, which also then in turn would be neuroaffirming, because the understanding is that autism and ADHD are just 2 parts that are under the umbrella of neurodivergent, right? When we really look at what is neurodiversity is all of us, right? Neurodivergence is when we're really focusing on these types of differences, right? These neurological differences. But trauma and complex trauma is also a neurodivergence. So when we're looking at this from a trauma-informed perspective, we're really then providing that full umbrella for how to provide neuro-affirming care then as well. That's compassionate and caring and warm and with a smile, and maybe providing that secure base because this child who's on their 4th foster placement has never experienced what that looks like, has never experienced what a safe adult is. So our hope is to provide that space for these kids.
That is fascinating. And then you mentioned attachment theory in there, which I dug way into way back in the day. Because I don't know if you know, well, you probably do, but if you remember, but it was like based on like an experiment that took place.
The wire monkey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I know it's a little bit.
Oh, so this is again like the elephant in the room with ABA, right? So when we talk about behaviorism, it doesn't have a pretty past. This is a great example of this. This is also a great example of how attachment theory, another science, also doesn't have a pretty past. So what, in this again, there's this thing called IRB approval, which is just a review board who says that this experiment is ethical. This experiment now would not pass IRB.
Is that the one where they adopted a monkey and had to grow up with the kid?
So they had it's a different monkey experiment. Okay. That one also wouldn't pass approval.
Which all the monkey experiments.
Not pretty much any of them, exactly. So what they did is they took these monkeys and they had one monkey that, they dressed up a monkey or a wire mannequin, essentially like a monkey. One of them was just designed to provide and deliver food. That's the behaviorist mindset, which is they will come for the reinforcement that they need, which is food. Everybody needs food, right? So they're always going to come and they're always going to stay with that reinforcement. Then what they did is they also dressed up a wire monkey to provide the most loving comfort, right? So like that monkey's preferred blanket or toy or snuggle, whatever it might have been. Like
by wire,
like a baby's like a mannequin, like a wire mannequin. And then that wire monkey would deliver just the comfort. What they found was the real monkeys would only go to the food wire monkey to feed and then immediately go to the comfort and spend about 90% of their time with the wire monkey who had all of their love and comfort and supports. So again, this kind of goes to show that everybody is driven to some need, right? We will meet those needs when we have to, but honestly, our biggest need is love and comfort.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. But again, that totally wouldn't pass today. You wouldn't be able to do that type of experiment today, but it's a really great, in my opinion, a great picture of what children really need and what people really need, which is, yeah, sure, we need food, but we really crave comfort.
That's fascinating. I mean, you're talking about things obviously with early childhood, but I mean, this carries on to adulthood and relationships. I mean, attachment theory is a big piece of like how you handle your relationships and secure attachment and I've heard like avoidant attachment and anxiety attachment. Like there's a lot of these things kind of
and then they overlap.
Through. Exactly.
And you'll go to a default attachment style. There is actually a fantastic attachment theorist who is in Morrison. So just up the road. Yeah. Her name is Eli Harwood. She's amazing. She actually has a book that's coming out in September. I'm like giving her a little plug, I guess.
Cool.
But it's all about attachment theory with children. She has another one that's specifically about like romantic relationships as well. So yeah, it's really cool.
I've heard a lot about that. And I heard that I hope I'm getting this right, but like those who are secured attachment, defined as a secured attachment, are the people who are by and large, as they get older, who are in like really secure relationships, and they're usually linked up together with somebody else with a secure relationship. And then you have these other ones with a lot of different like anxiety attachments or avoidant attachment, and they're starting to mingle, and they're kind of like oil and water where they're probably not meant to be, but since there's not someone with secure attachment around,
they never had a model to see what a secured base looks like.
Right.
So they seek out whatever it most similarly mimicked. Yeah.
Which is crazy.
It is. Oh, really, really crazy. And that's how generational trauma, I think, continues to build upon itself.
That's fascinating. And it makes sense. I think everybody, let's start with this. So when you say complex trauma,
define
that a little bit more for us so we understand that.
Okay, so again, this is coming from a BCBA, so this is not coming from a psychologist.
Yeah,
Please
okay.
take that with a grain of salt. So complex trauma is whenever early on or in a younger phase of your life, or it could be later on, but where it's such acute trauma and continuous trauma, like what you would call like big T events, big trauma events happen. So combat veterans, right? That's complex trauma. SA survivors, DV survivors, that is acute trauma that then leads to usually complex trauma. It's also important to remember that literally everybody experiences events differently. So what might have been traumatic for you might not have been traumatic for me, even though we experienced literally the exact same thing. And this is also one of the biggest issues that I think a lot of the older generation struggle with, which is, that didn't bother me. Why is that bothering you? And the reality is that it probably did bother them, but they were never given the tools to allow it to bother them, to go through it, that they instead just focused on suppression and repression. And then what ends up happening is that these reactive behaviors end up happening to very seemingly small events. And it's because your body keeps the score. And whenever it's pre-triggered, you don't recognize it cognitively, but your body will, and it will react to it.
That's fascinating.
There's that King of the Hill episode,
Mhm.
you know what I'm talking about, where he's like, just swallow your pain, Bobber.
Yeah.
And he's like, and you can see like the lump go down, and like,
Yeah.
I can't remember how it ends, but it probably
poor
ends up with some
Bobby.
exploding.
It probably does. Poor Bobby.
Yeah.
He's like a walking life lesson.
That's my purse.
I don't know you. Yeah.
My gosh. Well, it's crazy. I think with men, I think it is oftentimes where you have to you're told by your father or other masculine figure to swallow it or get over it.
Yeah.
That's like the main one, right? Get over it. You know?
Oh, yeah.
And like, I definitely have that in me. Like, I know when there's intense traumas, my defense mechanism is to just go numb.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know how it happens. It just goes numb.
Oh, yeah.
And then I like don't really stay in the moment for things. I remember just
You
going to
disassociate.
funerals as a kid and be like,
Mhm.
you probably should be crying right now, but you're not feeling that. And just something just comes over me where it's just like, I'm just here and I'm just observing, but I'm also not like, my feelings aren't coming through.
Right. But
And-
then a song will come on the radio.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, you're crying in your car.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's just very interesting. And
Is that Miley Cyrus's Party in the USA?
yes,
for you?
that's the one.
Yeah. For me, it's Cowboy Take Me Away. For me.
But it's so true. It's just so interesting. And then
Yeah.
you're seeing these in these young kids. It's just so
Oh, yeah.
crazy. And
Well, what's really crazy too is like we've been hitting on this a lot. It's the caregivers, it's the parents, because again, like we're dealing with men who have been told their entire lives, no, these children may not express these feelings. I wasn't allowed to express these feelings. And then you have the women who are then also trying to make up for that. But then my therapist says that my children are supposed to feel these feelings. And so they're trying to manage all of this weight in one household. And so what I'm seeing the most is that there's one caregiver who's typically taking on the majority of this role, this stress of managing everybody's emotions. And it's too much. And then what ends up happening is that you have a BCBA like me come in and then tell you all of this stuff. And then you're just like, oh no. And then it just kind of like all comes out. And then there's a lot of parental guilt, right? Of, I didn't know any better. And also then trying to, again, we're dealing with, they've missed early intervention, right? We're dealing with adults now. And so now we're trying to change behavioral patterns that are sometimes 30, 40 years old. And sometimes if they're with a grandparent who's a caregiver, 60 or 70 years of learning history. And that's a lot. And that's hard behavior change. And that's where you see a lot of resistance, right? Because I don't want to deal with the trauma from my past. It's in my past for a reason. And so you really have to then try to work through parents' understanding of why they need to work through some of these things that they don't want to work through for the benefit of their child's behavior. And that's hard.
And when you mention caregiver, you're mentioning just anybody in like a parental guardianship
Yeah.
over a child, right?
And I say that mostly because there again, I have so many parents who are not actually the biological parent, and that you want to include as many as you can because it's a very complex world out there.
It's so true. My business partner for Recon actually fostered a kid and adopted
Yeah.
him. I think coming up on 2 years for it. And
Feels longer than that, but probably
well,
2
he
years.
started fostering him before that, but he
Oh, yeah,
officially
yeah.
adopted him like I think it was 2 years in October or September. It's like really close, 2 years ago now. But just such a fascinating kid.
Yeah.
But you're talking about like multiple families and all these different things. He went through all of that and just off the charts intelligence. In
Yes.
fact, and I don't want to get too much into his business, but he essentially had a hard time fitting in with kids his age because he was just so smart and he was only essentially treated as an adult his whole life. So he's
the adultification.
never like he doesn't mess with
Mhm.
kids his age. He does
Yeah.
not want to be around kids his age. He wants to be with the adults.
And that's also really normal for kids who have had those types of upbringings, right? Or kids who are under that full neurodivergent umbrella. That's why you do often find autistic children not wanting to be around their peers because they're like, dude, that's weird. Like we do the flip all the time, right? Like, well, why is he stimming? Why is he flapping? Why are you doing that? That's weird. Why are you going with those rules that don't make sense? That should be questioned, right? Why are you complying with that? That's also, I think, what ends up happening with a lot of our neurodivergent kids is that just they are beyond they're beyond a level of maturity that their peers are at, because they've already experienced it. They've already solved that problem. And so consequently, when they're in school, they're really bored because they're like, man, I learned this on Monday when the teacher first talked about this lesson. And now I'm the one who's in trouble because I'm bored and I started coloring on the desk instead, right? But the reality is like, you probably should have moved to the lesson further for that particular kid. Or maybe they zoned out because they didn't get it because they weren't able to read the instruction that was provided to them, but nobody checked, right? So there's this kind of accountability thing that's lacking as well with our neurodivergent kids and our kids who have gone through the foster system. And there's also this expectation that they can't, right? That's still skills-based mindset where it's not strengths-based, but it's deficit.
There's
And
certain states that
yeah.
don't even acknowledge dyslexia as an actual thing.
Isn't
That's
that crazy?
crazy.
And there's a lot of people, because of ADHD has become so like in the
Oh
the
yeah.
forefront of the zeitgeist. They're like, everyone has ADHD nowadays. It's like, and like,
Everybody's a little
Yeah.
autistic. No, they aren't.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is a spectrum. But like,
Yeah.
like
mean
there's
everybody's on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. There's a difference.
Well, and it's really interesting too. So last week I was up in Denver for this conference. It was called the 8P chromosome. It's a really cool community because it's really young and really not very well known. But we're talking about like the spectrum, and a lot of these kids were first diagnosed with autism or other different medical diagnoses that they didn't have. But once they did the genetic research, they found that it was just specific, the 8P chromosome.
Okay.
It was either an addition, a deletion, or a combination of both.
Wow.
But it affects motor skills. It affects communication skills, which really communication is a motor issue. So it's really kind of a cool thing. And I think that what we're going to find is that the more genetic research that we've done, the more that we're going to find that the spectrum is really, really coded pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, there's actual things to approve ADHD within the way like the brain is, like you can visually see it in the brain, I believe, right? Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah.
And
There's some great
yeah.
stuff that they're doing with that.
and like before we couldn't, like we just knew that there was behavioral differences, but now we can visually actually say like, we can prove this, like you can literally see it in the brain.
Yeah. You can see the fires.
Yeah.
It's really neat.
That's fascinating. Did you ever watch the show? I think it was on Netflix, or maybe it was before even Netflix. But it was, I know I've seen it on Netflix. Is Atypical. Did you ever watch that show?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a great show.
That was a good
And I
show.
mean, it's essentially like, I think one of the first shows surrounding the main character as someone with autism.
I think you're right. I want to
Is
say
that the
that
one
it was
with the
one of the first
doctor?
ones. No, that's The Good Doctor.
Okay, The Good Doctor. Because
Oh,
that's
maybe
a
it's
similar
another one.
concept. Yeah.
Yeah, but this one was really about like a teenager and like
Mhm.
kind of like going through his
Adolescence.
like just
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
with his family, and it was
Rick
well written, too.
Glassman's in a newer show called, because he's actually like on the autistic spectrum, but his show is As We See It. Actually, it's a newer
cool.
show, and it's like every character in that show has actual autism in real life too as well. So,
Nice.
Yeah.
And of course, I love Love on the Spectrum. That's all.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
That's
Yeah.
right. So there's a lot of shows that are coming
Yeah.
out and emerging that are kind of
Yeah.
talking more about this thing that by and large was something that no one really spoke about. And we threw all the kids in special ed. And then that was
Yeah.
kind of how we dealt with all those kids.
Oh yeah.
It's just kind of cool because I feel like there's more education and information out there and what the spectrum actually is and what,
and
it's really cool.
It makes it almost more though confusing and daunting then for the professionals then in that special ed field or in the academic field to then say like, well, how am I supposed to be able to manage this?
Right.
Because most teachers are only given a pretty finite scope to practice, right? And then, but now when there is this kind of push for inclusion, they're not given the tools and supports or even the training in undergrad to be able to manage these types of like behavioral differences across 20 to 25 kids in a class.
It's almost like you have to be a psychologist to even be a teacher.
Seriously. I mean, oh my gosh, you're not, I don't think you're far off at all, especially when you look at like what they're having to deal with. Because it's a totally different landscape than the 80s and 90s. It really and truly is from what we're looking at academically.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. So with ABA, it's been
Yeah.
around for six years now. You've hit 6 years?
Yeah. So we are a little bit over 6 years now of being in practice. It'll be 7 years in January.
All here
Yeah.
in the Springs, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And like I said, we started all in home and it's been fantastic. It's definitely a challenge just because like what we've talked about already, like it's a lot for somebody like me or somebody like our behavior technicians to come into a home and to meet that family where they are culturally, but then also bring in some behavior changes. It can be a lot to deal with and a lot to manage, but we've been really fortunate. I will say, having the center then brought to light some other things that were important for generalization. So what we are finding is that some of our kids who have been mostly in home for a long time are now getting this opportunity to be in center with peers. And that's really neat to see. Just to see those social interactions and social connections.
That's what I figured would be very interesting.
That's what we really kind of thrive on there. Because we really wanted to make sure that when you walked in to our agency that it welcomed everyone and that each room was really set for generalization, because across environments, that's what the name came from. Was we really saw that there was this lack of generalization from the clinic to the home, to the school, to the community. And so when we started the actual center-based services, we wanted to make sure that we were still going to be able to incorporate that. So each room is very much designed to emulate something in the community. So we have a sensory-based room, and we have a room that's really supposed to be designed more for like a bedroom and pretend play. We have one that's supposed to be mimicked like a classroom and an art room and just a nice social engagement gem room too. So it's really that's the thought behind it. But then we are still finding that a lot of our caregivers and parents are struggling with the school process in general. And where so many schools will say, this is what we're going to be able to provide, and they talk about it in their IEP meeting, what they are finding in practice is not happening. And there's just a little, there's little accountability for those schools to provide then the supports that they're claiming that they're going to be able to provide. Or they'll say, well, we can't provide a one-on-one paraprofessional for you or for your student, even though it's medically necessary. And we've had so many who have had seizure disorders where literally it's contingent on somebody being able to monitor what their eyelids are doing to be able to say they're about to have a grand mal seizure or not, right? Or that they need to be able to communicate the specific thing if that they need help, that they are not provided than a paraprofessional. And it's just mind-blowing to me. So with that, several of us from the community came together and we recognized this need for a private school to help benefit those needs as well. So in September, we have the IEP school. So it's the individualized educational process school to really help provide that need. So it is very much holistic. We have at the beginning of each person who starts our services with the school, they will have an IEP meeting with the caregiver, but then also with their full team. If they have private speech path, private OT, private PT, music, their own child psychologist, if they have all of those things, we'll work with them. If they don't, then we'll contract with outside providers to provide those services. But we've really found that what kids need is a holistic approach to their education, and they're not receiving this. And the unfortunate things that we've seen in some of the classrooms are paraprofessionals who are left alone with 14 kids on IEPs because there isn't a teacher who's there to support. And that's dangerous. It's unsafe. And we know that it's dangerous and unsafe because we have actual observational reports that talk about what's happened in some of these schools. And it's something that should be addressed within Colorado Springs more. And I'm really surprised that it's not a larger issue and that we aren't talking about some of these concerns. But I know that it's a concern of mine as a parent. And I know that it's a concern of my learners because they're the ones who are contingent or who are dependent on this education that they're not receiving. And it's supposed to be an individualized process, right? But if they're not given if the teachers aren't given the tools to provide this individualized education, it's not going to happen. So that's what our hope is with the school, is that everybody will be provided the services that they need with that quality individualized education and instruction that should come with it.
Well, that's a big step.
It's a huge step. Yeah.
Big
it's
step.
not, it hasn't been taken lightly.
Yeah. So, I mean, where's the school going to be? And
Yes.
It's just, there's a lot of questions that spurred off of that. That's I mean, kudos to you for taking this on, by the way.
Thanks.
And seeing this as a huge issue, not only Colorado Springs, but again, across everywhere, right? So talk a little bit more about like where it's at,
Yes.
how people can get plugged into that too, because that's
Cool.
just really cool.
So right now it is a private school. So we're working on the accreditation and credentialing process with the state of Colorado. So that's something to always keep in mind. But we essentially we're housing out of our current agency because it's so small right now.
Right.
We really only have a few students who've expressed interest, and we definitely don't want to grow before we're capable.
Smart.
Right. This isn't my first business. So we have to make sure that what we're doing has the systems in place. So making sure that there's quality directorship, quality teachers, and then that's where things will grow from there. So right now the space is still where we are, which is at the corner of Garden of the Gods and Centennial. But we will be working out of the classroom, but then really still focusing on those individual needs. So this was something that I was explaining to some of the two students we have, which is that it's not going to look totally different than your current ABA. However, now you'll be receiving direct teacher instruction, which will be adding on to what you've been needing. So you'll have these behavioral supports, but these learners have already been something that we very much pride ourselves in is working with other agencies. So we love working with other OTs and speech paths and PTs in the area. So many of them already have these services. And so we work with them already. So those are easily embedded throughout their day as is. And then now we just add on the additional pieces that they need. So it's the applications of these maths and sciences and reading skills that these kids are actually going to use later on in their lives, as opposed to passing whatever standardized tests that they need to.
Mm-hmm. And is there other schools, IEP schools in Colorado Springs as
This
well?
is the first one. So there are other behavioral support schools that are in Colorado Springs. So there's BOCES, there's Griffith Centers. There are a couple that are, I'm drawing a blank on one of them. Roundup, that's the name. So there are a few. This is slightly different because of how small it is and because of that individualized instruction, as well as the individualized behavior technician who's specifically assigned to that student.
I love it. That's why I went to UCCS, because back when I went to UCCS, it was like, I forgot what it was, but it was like a professor to like 20 kids. And back then, I mean, at a university, that's huge. That's a very big deal.
That was exactly why I went to the undergrad that I went to. Mine was a 1-to-12 ratio, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
And but it made a difference. Like, right when we were talking about this with classrooms, it makes a huge difference when you have the size class that's going to benefit you.
To call back to my art teacher, my art program by Art 4, I was the only person in Art 4, and there was only 2 other people in Art 3. So like not many people were striving to be farther into that. So it's like I did have that more individualized aspect with her.
But you still thrived in that instruction, right? And I think that also goes to show too that, and this was touching back to the very beginning of our conversation, your value of art and practicing art is what got you there.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many other classes besides Art 1 and Art 3. There's ceramics, there's this, there's all that that I had to go through to get to Art 4. So
But you saw the value in that, and that's what really has guided you since then to what you're doing now.
Exactly. Yeah. It's I get paid for my creativity. So yeah.
This was the best advice that my dad ever gave me. And this was right when I was graduating from college. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I think we learned that it was not an easy path. But he said, you will know that you are doing what you're supposed to do because you would literally do it without getting paid. And that's not what people want to be told now, right? In our capitalistic society, everybody wants, well, no. Like I should just be able to then get paid then for Frolic in the Woods. Yeah, you could. You 100% can get paid to Frolic in the Woods.
There's some influencers that do it right now today. So.
Exactly. Black Fat and Getting It. Oh my gosh. He is one of my favorite influencers right now in Colorado. His name is, oh my gosh, I don't know his real name. His handle.
Is, well, the handle, yeah.
Yes, Fat, Black, and Getting It.
Okay, Fat, Black, and Getting It.
He's amazing because he goes around all of Colorado and like he highlights these really cool hikes. Like he did Mount Herman a few weeks ago.
Are you
and
serious?
I was like, yes.
I love that mountain.
I do too. And he's like, does
it's
anybody know where this
That's my
is?
favorite mountain.
And it was like the the burned out car that we all love.
Oh yeah. That's crazy.
I know. And like he did like paddle boarding one day, but like it was totally a humiliating experience for him, but he put himself out there because it's values aligned, right? But that's what I'm saying is that my dad gave me that advice, and that's advice that I've carried with me forever, because the reality of being an entrepreneur and a business owner that nobody wants to talk about is that it is an investment, and you will not always recoup your investment. There are many months that I have not paid myself to make sure that my staff get paid. And that's something too that I don't think many people like to talk about. But the reality is that I often have gone without to ensure that this business stayed afloat.
Well, there's like, you have insecurities that pop up when you want to talk, when you don't want to talk about that, because you could feel like that reflects like your business, or you could feel like all these other things that could come in and it just
Honesty.
necessarily,
You got to be honest.
Yeah. And that's just how business is, all businesses go through the hardship,
Yes.
It's like,
and unless you've been through the hardship, I don't trust you as a business.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
You took the easy way out every single time.
Or you're lying, right?
Or you're lying.
Yeah.
And that's also what I'm finding too, in just my field in particular, is the easy way out is to sell to private equity. The hard thing to do is to do the sweat equity.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And private equity is running rampant in ABA, and it is crazy in Colorado, especially. Like it is.
Well, that's
it's
how
everywhere.
bubbles happen. Like that's how
You're exactly right.
like bad business happens, because
That's
you
why
don't go through the hard work.
that's why so many businesses are the way that they are, is because they've continuously grown. But the only reason they've grown is because of equity. And somebody's just looking at the investment. And so all they're looking at the bottom line. They're never looking at the people. And so like if I've worked at large companies before, and you are just a number no matter how high up you are.
Right.
In fact, the higher up you are, the higher number you are that you might need to be off of the books.
Right.
And that's something that people don't like to think about. But when you're investing in your people, sometimes that means that as me on the top, I'm not on the top. I might be very much at the bottom to ensure that the growth and the systems are there and that the people are supported.
Yeah. Well, what kind of key takeaways Meg now, 2024, would give Meg in 2028, knowing all the things that you've learned through across environments?
That's another great question. I think you touched on this a little bit, which is imposter syndrome is going to come up, and that's okay. Imposter syndrome is something that I do feel like I deal with on a daily basis, because I in the ABA, and it's the same in all fields, right? Like there are guys that y'all idolize, I'm sure, that are in the AV world and then the podcast world. And you're like, yeah, one day I'm going to be like this. I think that what I'm recognizing the older I get is it doesn't matter. You don't have to be like somebody who's great in your field. You just have to be you, and you just have to live within your values. And as long as I'm doing that 4 years from now, I will feel pretty good. I will feel, even if my company is the exact same size that it is today, I'm going to feel okay. I'll still be able to sleep at the end of the night, right? Because what I did was what I wanted to do, and what I did was honest, and what I did was practicing what I was preaching, essentially. So as long as I can continue doing that, I think in 4 years I'll feel really good.
That's a great answer. Most definitely. What do the folks think now? Because you come from an entrepreneurial family. What do they think of Meg now?
So my dad came up a couple of weeks ago. We went fly fishing together because, why this
I've
is
been
what
trying
I
to
grew
learn,
up
by
with.
the way, as of this past weekend.
Oh, you
I'm
have?
trying
Nice.
to learn.
Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah.
the Blue Cool Angler has some great one-on-one classes. It's an evergreen. It's fantastic. I've been fly fishing now for about 30 years. So if you
Oh my
want some
gosh,
tips, I'm happy to
yes.
help you.
For sure.
But I haven't taught my husband for the sake of our marriage.
Okay.
This is a big
Because he would take it over or what?
No, because I'm worried that when I'm going to get frustrated trying to teach him. My
Okay.
children both have fantastic casts because I've learned how I can't multitask, right? So I won't fly fish when I'm with them. I just let them fly fish
Right.
and help
Mhm.
them. I'm the guide essentially, and that helps a ton. But my dad was up a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling him that we're thinking about expanding to San Antonio, oddly enough, mostly because we have a lot of like-minded colleagues who are in that area. But their insurance in Texas is just, it's a whole beast. So
Mhm.
we're going to figure out what it's like in Bexar County.
So not good? Or
Yeah, it's
okay.
it's very decentralized. So it's just, that's fine. Texas is huge. I
Yeah.
get it. But it was funny because my dad said, well, why did they decide to work with you? And I said, well, because Dad, I'm pretty good at this.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that there's still kind of this idea.
Was he
that
just curious, or was he thinking, did he think that you weren't capable?
I'm the baby.
Okay.
I'm the baby of the family.
Aw.
And so it's very much like the idea of like, I guess maybe by golly, she does have it.
Okay.
But it's so funny because like I'll send in our family group text, I'm presenting at this conference this weekend, and my sister will be like, oh yeah, I saw, that's so great. And then my dad will just give like the thumbs up. I'm like, okay. Yeah.
It's a big thumbs up though, right?
Right. It's a big thumbs up. It's not just like the
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because I think he still sometimes has to remind himself like, oh, okay, maybe she will be okay. Because again,
Mhm.
my 20s, I very much took that time as I feel, and this is advice that I try to give my employees too who are younger. Your 20s are designed for mistakes.
Mhm.
Your prefrontal cortex is literally not is not connected before the age of 25. And so when that time comes, then there's going to be another huge leap, which is like, oh my gosh, I've made all of these mistakes before the age of 25. And there's this like weird behavioral reckoning. And I think that sometimes adults who have adult children struggle to recognize that they're now past that prefrontal cortex
100%.
reckoning.
100%. I was just listening to a podcast today, and it was Cody Sanchez,
Yeah.
and she was just
Diary
talking
of the
about
CEO?
like, yeah, it was
Okay.
Diary of a
It just came out today.
Nice.
Same thing. But she was like, pretty much your whole 20s. I mean, this might have been even a Zoom call she was on actually too. But anyways,
Okay.
she was like, the 20s are pretty much designed in her mind is just learn as
Yes.
much, and again, make mistakes.
Have as much experience as possible.
Mhm.
100%.
Yeah, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about that a lot too.
Oh,
Yeah.
make
I
as
have
many
lost-
mistakes
yes,
as you
and-
possibly can, as far as within reason. Don't
Mhm.
go to
Right.
prison or anything.
Right. But you should make it. You should
Mhm.
make mistakes. I cannot count on my fingers and toes how many jobs I have had. And I think that when I talk about that, people are like, "What? But you have a career." I do. I have a career now because of all of these jobs that I had in the past. Being a barista, being a dog walker, like randomly house sitting, working in every single possible random restaurant that I could, waking up at 4:30 in the morning to bake cupcakes in Redondo Beach, right? All of these things taking the bus to Gardena from downtown to sell life insurance, all of these things developed who I am today. Being fired from a multimedia company who sold airtime for infomercials, one of the most humiliating experiences of my life, but it was also one of the best experiences of my life. Because had I not been fired, I wouldn't have then moved on to something else, right? So I always hate changes like this, right? Because it hurts. It's a rupture. When an employee leaves or when we have to let an employee go, it's a rupture. It's a relationship that's ended and it hurts. There's pain there. But I always try to emphasize this with them anytime that there is that type of relationship that ends with employment, which is you've learned something here. And I hope that you continue on with learning and making mistakes, and that this was a safe place for you to make these mistakes, even if the outcome wasn't what we both wanted. Because really, I think what everybody pictures in their mindset or their mind whenever they start a job, which is I'm going to climb the corporate ladder, and the next thing you know, I'm going to be making 6 figures in less than 6 months. But that's not the reality. And the reality is that most jobs end in either you quitting or you're being fired, or you're being laid off.
Or it takes 10 years.
Or it takes 10 years to get there. And you might not be willing to your values might not align for that long, right? So it's a lot. It's a lot to think about whenever you're young and you have the mindset of like, well, I'm supposed to have it all figured out, but it's okay. Some people don't get it figured out until they're 60, and that's okay. I might have a totally different career when I'm 60,
for sure,
and that's okay.
You may change it at 60.
Right. I might decide to like go off into like my other passion, which was like in high school, which was theater. Maybe I want to go off to Broadway then. You never know.
What's his name? Ian, the guy who played Ian McKinnon, who played Lord of the Rings. He wasn't even a famous actor until he was like in his 70s or 80s or something like that.
That's crazy.
Morgan Freeman, pretty much the exact same way.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy stuff. So like, again, like there's no definitive timeline. Every day you wake up and you can choose something else if it's not what was right for you that day before.
This has been such an awesome conversation. I mean, I feel like we can talk to you for like 7 hours for sure.
This has been great, y'all.
Yeah. Thank you so much
for
coming on.
You awake, Edgar?
He's taking it all in.
He was just like,
he's really thinking about now his values and mine's journey.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything before I throw it to the camera?
No, I think we're good. Yeah.
Awesome, y'all.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much. And like I said, you just got our wheels churning. We were just like firing away because this has been a really insightful episode. And we can tell you have definitely found a passion here because you dove into so much and you had so much insight again. So thank you again. This is your camera. Where can we find you?
So ABA Across Environments is ABAacrossenvironments.com is the best website. And I'm on Instagram at just Across Environments. Those are usually the best ways to get a hold of me. But yeah.
Awesome. Is that where they can also sign up for IEP as well?
That is, at least for the time being, until that website's fully launched.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. Well, thank you again for your time, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Sounds good.
Boom. That was good.
That was fun. This was a great conversation, y'all. I love that personal experience. That was really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, that was a really good one.